Hello, 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 and welcome to the Anti-Racist Enneagram podcast with Jessica Denise Dixon, where we look at life and healing at the intersections of the Enneagram, anti-racism, and embodiment for personal and collective liberation. Let's go.
Not trying to get by. Trying to get by. I'm trying to get free. Trying to get free.
So I was thinking, how are you going to have an anti-racist Enneagram podcast without actually talking about what the Enneagram is? So, of course, that episode had to come sooner or later, and I'm doing it sooner so that we can actually just dive in a little bit deeper in future podcasts. So, Enneagram basics. The Enneagram means nine-sided figure. Yes, that's what it translates to. Don't at me. So go ahead and Google the figure if you haven't yet. And what you will find is a circle with 9 numbers. You'll see a triangle at points 9, 3, and 6. And then you'll see some other interconnected lines. So these all have very specific symbolism that is part of the Enneagram. So the Enneagram in general focuses on our mental and emotional habits that drive the actions we take. I'll talk about that more in a second. The Enneagram presupposes that there are 9 distinct ways of relating to the world, that we have each of these 9 ways within us, but we do have one core way that our ego structure, which helps gives us a personality, that helps gives us an ideal to move toward, our ideas of success, etc. We have one core type that our ego structure kind of clings to. Now, our Enneagram type is made up of our motivations and our reactivity. And these things actually contribute to the sensitivity of our nervous system, because our Enneagram type is so linked with our ego structure, which we need to give us a personality to move through life. When these things feel like they're at threat or at risk, it's going to trip up our nervous system. And the nervous system is going to go into some kind of reactivity. And sometimes it can feel like death when we're doing Enneagram work. But it's usually an ego death, which actually leads to more of us, which is one of the more beautiful things about this kind of work. Both Enneagram work and anti-racism work, they lead us closer to ourselves. They actually lead us to more of ourselves. Even when we feel like we are going to existentially lose something, we often find that the thing that we lost isn't something that we needed. It was something maybe that we clung to for our sense of self or our sense of survival. But often these things are false things that can fall away so that more of us can actually be present in the world. What do I want to say about the Enneagram? Looking at behavior is a trap. Now, let me talk about this for just 1 second, because I know a lot of people who have found their type because they know other people who do the same things as them. I know some people who don't feel like they could be a specific type because they had a mother who was that type, or a so-and-so who was that type, and they could never, because they would never, because they don't do the same kinds of things. And looking at behavior can be a trap for multiple reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is because our motivations are the things that are driving us. So when we look at that, our behavior might look the same as someone who has a different motivation. Our motivations are broken down into our basic fears, so core fears of our type, and core desires, these drives that we have that are often kind of living in the unconscious, right below what we know about the world and how we see the world. And so looking at our behavior may or may not point us to a motivation, because in this society, often we talk about motive, or we say, like, people talk about, like, what are you driven by? What are you, or mindset stuff, right? So people are talking about that on, I would say, kind of a broad level, but the reality is that we don't talk about them very deeply. We often talk more about the how or the what of ourselves, even compared to other personality systems, like the strengths, or the DISC, or the MBTI, regardless of how you feel about whether any of these systems are good or not. You may hate the Enneagram, cool, whatever. But we're not necessarily taught about how to go into the depth of our why beneath as a society. And I think that it can be scary as a society, because this society has a lot of things to reconcile. So if we're afraid to look at our motivations, it's actually going to stop us from being able to really move forward. So again, our Enneagram type is our motivations broken down into core fears, core desires, and then our reactivity. Now, when we're far from our desires, when we're moving closer to our fears, when we're triggered, when we face something that feels existential, up comes our reactivity. They come through a few things, and these are technical things, and I like to teach them because I think it helps people be able to really look at their own lives and their own worlds. We're not going to go through every type because these are short episodes. The one of the ways that we react is through our passion, which is an energetic or emotional habit. So it's a heart quality, the passion. When you think like passion, think like passion. It comes from like passion of the Christ, this thing that must be faced within that experience. The next is the fixation, which is our mental thought habits and patterns, and then our defense mechanisms, which are so important because our defenses they are kind of like the bouncer for any experience that would be opposed to the things that are important to our Enneagram type. Which means that even things that are good, things that are expansive for us, our defense mechanism comes up and bounces it right on out. And this is before we even realize it, because defense mechanisms are different from coping mechanisms. Defense mechanisms just pop up. Coping mechanisms, maybe we end up like drinking a glass of wine when we're stressed. Like, that's a coping mechanism. But our defenses, they're ninjas in the night, baby. And they show up before we even realize it. But these things, they're going to shape our behavior. So you can't look at behavior and say doing X means that I'm Y type. But you can look and you can say doing X for me is pointing to Z as my motivation. What do the rest of my habits look like around that? And does that point to Y as my type? The Enneagram, like, isn't a religion. It's not something that you have to believe in, right? Like, but it is said that you can't truly know yourself if you aren't looking at yourself through two different dimensions. One is self-awareness, and the other is cultural awareness. Now, we've each been socialized into culture and cultures that end up becoming, quote, our norm. They unconsciously shape our view on the world and how we judge other things. Now, we also have an Enneagram type that is our ego structure's way of making sure that we're okay and successful. And these things are also unconscious. So the work that I'm inviting us all into is of making both conscious so that we can live with more self-awareness and others' awareness in the world. So that we stop seeing ourselves just as individuals, but as people who are actually connected to a bigger, more interconnected story. That, individuating, like learning about ourselves and understanding who am I, is not the same as individualism. So both our self-awareness and cultural awareness are really needed if we're going to actually be able to move forward into liberation. And if we have privilege in some way, when that feels threatened, often it's going to filter through the reactivity of our Enneagram type, or even may point to one of our resource points. Now, if you look at the Enneagram symbol, look at your core, the core number, your core number, and the lines that are connected, look across, find those numbers, and each number on the side. I call those the resource points. Because often when we're there for a reason. We take on sometimes the motivation, sometimes the characteristics, and we can go, sometimes we camp out at them, and sometimes we just go and get a resource and we pull it back so that we can actually move forward. So this all is like, I think, very exciting work. I think it's exciting. Do you know your type? Like, and even maybe like more importantly, like, are you willing to look at what might be unconscious to you and unpack it? That is the question. Are you willing? When I'm talking to clients, one of the most important things for me that everyone knows is that you are already whole and complete. That nothing could rip that from you. No amount of shame can. Shame is not an identity. It's just an emotion or an experience. So the things that we look at, the things that we unpack about ourselves and about our experience, they only lead us to more of the depth and beauty. They uncover more of us. You know, when you think about an old home with like old, beautiful brick that's been painted over and over and over, this process is like restoring the original brick. We gently and carefully, we use the right tools. We got to get our tools and our resources for ourselves. And we use them to carefully remove these layers of paint that have been covering the beauty that is already there. It's not something that you have to find or create, it's already there. And if you say no to that, it's going to be hard to move toward liberation. In both Enneagram and anti-racism work, there are opportunities for you to know parts of your soul, parts that were stolen and wrecked by colonialism, by dehumanization, parts that have been closed off because of your type, things that don't seem safe because your type doesn't think that you will survive if you go toward them. But these parts, they only feel stolen. They only feel wrecked, and we can reclaim them. We can. And we really need each other for the journey. So who are the people in your world who you can call up and say, I need you to hear me. I need you to see this part of myself that I feel is so hideous. I want to hide it from the world. Will you witness me? Please. And we need people who are going to say yes to that. So what's your type? How much have you actually explored not just the behavior, but these aspects of the motivation and the reactivity? Because that is where the juice is. That is where it is, baby. So from love and for liberation, peace out. I will talk to you soon.
I'm not trying to get by.